Alrighty, guys. So if you don't mind, here, let's start with Tony, and then we just go around. If you don't mind just giving a quick introduction of who each of you is.
Sure. My name is Tony Moreno. I'm a professor of kinesiology at Eastern Michigan University, and I teach courses in biomechanics and performance enhancement. I got my doctorate from Michigan State University. My emphasis there was in biomechanics, but also growth maturation was one of my cognates, and physical anthropology. So it's quite a mix of various disciplines that I oftentimes bring to these discussions about movement and physical activity and physical literacy. So that's a little bit about my background.
So yeah, I apologize. I'm currently nursing some serious allergies at the moment. So, but I've worked in youth strength and conditioning for 8 years. I am a strength and conditioning coach at MedStar Sports Medicine, where we train elementary, middle, high school, and college kids, and we take them through the long-term athletic development model. And we start as young as age 7, and oddly enough, a lot of my college girls now started with me at that age. So it's been really rewarding for me to see long-term athletic development from a practical standpoint. Of course, there's so much amazing research on the physical, mental, and social benefits, but to see it in action in real life and coaching in the trenches has been incredible. And I'm a huge LTAD woman, and Rick and Tony have absolutely inspired me in the past couple of years to really push it at the grassroots level and to educate the parents, educate the players, even the coaches and the stakeholders at clubs in the area, and even out of the state of Maryland. I'm located in Baltimore. There's a lot of clubs here, but I don't see why I can't preach good soccer strength and conditioning on a worldwide scale. So that's been my goal in the past couple years, going to keep pushing it this year in 2020, and just educating about the beautiful game and being safe, and making this about getting better for sports, but also for life.
How do you follow that up, Rick?
Yeah, I was going to accidentally shut myself out of the call now and say, oh, I'm having technical difficulties, but well, thanks a lot. I'll give it a shot. So I'm Rick Howard.
No
Yeah, no pressure. I'm a professor of applied sports science at Westchester University, which is right outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Also, I run the fitness center at the Wilmington Country Club. So I run all the sports programming there, as well as general fitness, personal training, etc. I'm also a teacher up at Kaler. It's a health academy up in Iceland. So I have lots of experiences back and forth. And my favorite thing is how they all tie together. I think it's fantastic that I not only get to teach it, but I get to do it. So I can kind of see practitioners who are coming up through the ranks, what they're missing sometimes in the educational process. So I can try to incorporate that back into my teaching. And then from the teaching perspective, kind of recognizing, because I am still in it, I know what they're going to experience, what that feels like, what that looks like. So I think I can offer a lot more practical information. I'm very much the practical side of things. So I like to see what that looks like and how that works. I do a lot of volunteer work for the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So while we're having an LTAD conversation, I was lucky enough to be part of the writing team for the position statement that we wrote on long-term athletic development a couple, 3-4 years ago now, I guess. Also subsequent articles from that. We'd written a couple of articles preceding that just to kind of lay the groundwork for what we thought LTAD should actually be. That's provided so many wonderful opportunities to get to know you, to get to know Tony, Erica, and a lot of other people who are all in the same boat. And we're all, as we say, have our oars in the same direction. So now we're just trying to get other people to recognize that there is LTAD, and then how to actually implement it, and then how to move forward with it. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to have you all. And why don't we start there? What do you think, I mean, you just brought it up, so might as well go into it. What do you think LTAD should be?
Oh, so I get to start this one?
Can you explain what LTAD actually is for those people who don't know what it is?
All right, well, that's a good question. What it is been thought of just like almost every other construct we have in our industry. So many people have a different notion of what they think it is. And a lot of times it comes back to what it's not. So it came up almost as an answer because we knew that early sports specialization was not working. We knew that having kids do too much volume of work was not working. And we also knew that parents applying pressure to kids to do things that are beyond their developmental capabilities was not working. So LTAD as a framework, as a construct, as a philosophy, whatever you want to look at it is, it doesn't have a lot of grounding in terms of actual evidence. But we know everything else doesn't work. So we're like, wow, this has to work because everything else is not. So we have to kind of consider what we think of. So long term, how long is long term? So our notion is it's cradle to grave. So it's as early as we can get you to be active for as long as we can get you to be active. And then what do we need to do for you in the meantime to make sure that you're having the most successful opportunity to do that? So that's kind of how we're looking at long term now, although most of the earlier models really focused because it had an athletic component. So how do we get athletes? And we know that athletes kind of peak in their talent somewhere around 25 to 30 years old. The number varies a little bit. The latest Olympics actually drove that number up slightly. But we kind of looked at it then, and then it's almost like, okay, so now you're not an athlete anymore. Now what does it look like? So we've gone back and framed athlete as anybody. Tom Ferry and the Aspen Institute, that's anybody with a body. And it goes all the way back to Dan Bowerman at Nike, same thing. He looked at anybody with a body as an athlete. We have this notion that an athlete is an elite athlete, and that's it. But we're all athletes. So if we look at it in that construct, then we're saying, all right, this is an applicable program framework for everybody. And that's the exciting part about this, I think. So then the development part is sometimes we think that we have to get them ready by yesterday, right? Peak by Friday. So they have to be their best they can possibly be by age 8, and that's just it, right? So how do we actually progress that and frame that? Like Tony mentioned earlier with his background of what that should look like, it's been fantastic information to really guide that process so that we're not going too fast, not going too slow, recognizing that everybody's an individual. So we have to meet them where they are to help them get where they could actually be. I'll stop.
Wow.
Hey, Joel, I just want to make a brief comment with regard to one of Rick's statements, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
He indicated, when you look at long-term athletic development, it is a longitudinal framework. It's not, putting things in a microwave and expecting quick results, as he indicated. It's a crock-pot.
Oh, it's not? Oh.
So even though we might not have the direct evidence that some of these longitudinal frameworks, if we implement them, would be successful, what we do have is the evidence in the many components that make up the framework. So for example, growth and maturation is a field or a discipline that has been extensively examined. Pediatric exercise physiology, injury epidemiology as it relates to anterior cruciate ligaments injuries and overuse injuries and multiple overuse syndromes that we see in many of our youth sport. These are all things that have been looked at directly. And we do have a tremendous amount of information that supports the fact that, Rick alluded to, is that, even though we don't have any direct evidence about its success, the components of the framework, if implemented correctly, we integrate many of these facets of science that help support and potentially lend success to this framework to get kids where they need to be.
So how do you get the ball rolling, Erica, when you get parents of like 1.5-year-olds coming to you saying that their kids need to start lifting weights?
It's still an uphill battle at the grassroots level, but the more I can give the athletes I'm working with the long-term athletic development model and they stick with the program and I show the results that are coming of that. So they're not only just going to play at a high level in college, but even after they play that last game, they still have movement and fitness a part of their lives. And for me, that's the most important thing. And as Rick alluded to, this is about, like, there's no really end game here. It's absolutely cradle to grave, and this is a lifetime pursuit. So I always try to remind parents of that. And we even see now that during this time when immunity is so important in movement and realizing that we need to tap into our own strengths and take care of our health, that's huge as well. I always say kids will play that last game. So then who are you after that? And who do you choose to be? So when I start to ask them better questions and see what they value, then they can answer it themselves, and they start to think, and they're like, okay, well, maybe this is long-term, and we shouldn't be thinking, okay, well, someone's going to sign a contract at age 12. Like, we need to be thinking about that last game they play and the greater meaning to all of this. So that's how I've approached it. And I also try to give good analogies. So I relate long-term athletic development a lot to schooling, and you can't start to formulate high-level sentences without learning the ABCs first. And I'm a writer, and if I did not have first grade English, I don't think I would be writing as eloquently as I am now. So you have to go through all of those steps. And again, it's that lifetime pursuit. And we even look at the greats like Michael Jordan and Alex Morgan, Abby Wambach, and all these high-level athletes. They were in it for the long haul. And did a lot of them really specialize? No. So there's evidence on that end as well. And I know Joe Eisenman just came out with a great article on growth and maturation and late bloomers and how they're peaking their speed and their strength when they're in their 20s. So I think it's important to educate parents on the level the pros are reaching and what age they're peaking at. And we can't get on even an adolescent athlete for not being at their fastest. We can always improve, whether that's as athletes or humans.
Well, you guys are bringing up so many things to talk about that we can be here for a couple of weeks talking. But one of the things that I always like, especially since starting this documentary, it's becoming more and more obvious how, especially here, how little value we put in development, not just from a particular sport perspective, but from a physical perspective. I know that I, for example, get into arguments with coaches all the time when I tell them, kids cannot do something, and I'm told I'm an idiot or that I don't know what I'm talking about. And while obviously I have nowhere near the credentials you guys have, because, well, I don't do what you guys do, it seems like once you guys open my eyes to it, it's almost like impossible not to see it. And it's like, so how do we get more coaches, more parents to realize that we need to get the kids moving?
I think it definitely is important to showcase the results of long-term athletic development and something that's easy to follow and easy to understand. And I know you've created a lot of frameworks as far as the stages for each age and what they should be working on. I've started to do that as well. And I think parents definitely need a blend of the science and research, but then the practical side as well. And I found that taking a lot of video capture over time to show the improvement in movement is really valuable, whether that's with the basic movement patterns like squats, hip hinge, pushing, pulling, and then getting more technical with it and showing how they're improving their change of direction or able to stabilize their trunks when they're cutting and turning, and how that's good for injury reduction. So I think it's been good to give that visual and to show them instead of rather just tell. And I used to be guilty of just talking in my blog and telling, well, this is how you do it, without even like really showing proof of it. So I think it's important for us strength coaches at the grassroots level to start showing more rather than telling.
Erica, that's a great point too. And I think we talk about it, that we need that bottoms up grassroots approach, and we also need that top down approach. How do we reach out to all these organizations that are running this program who, you know what, if you get comfortable in your skin, what's going on, and you got that money machine going on, or you're getting kids through your program, you're like, why would I change this? This is working really well. Well, now we have the perfect opportunity. It got shut down. So now we can go back and we say, there are two issues here. There's the child development issue that everybody, really wants. But if you're running a successful program based on how many kids you get to keep coming and moving along and along and along, we need to incentivize somehow to make that right. And I think right now, knowing what we know about LTAD and everything else that's going on, we can start to build that back into the upcoming regulations, or if you're going to tie in any monetary prize, let's say, for those who want to come back. So if you're putting out relief money, for example, well, if you want relief money, you better show us how you're actually integrating LTAD principles into what you're doing. You're not just signing kids up again, because you're going to make the problem worse again, because now they're actually less physically ready than they were when we stopped. So we've already seen that we're not going to give them enough time to actually get their physical levels back up before they play. A lot of the leagues I've seen say, all right, we got a week of practice, then we're right back into the whole game scenario. So they haven't changed their approach at all. So unless we figure out a good way to incentivize them from the top down by showing what you're just talking about, how that works at the grassroots level, then we're really onto something. And now I think it's a really good time to make that happen.
Yeah, I agree, Rick. And I've seen both sides going on now, where some clubs are making the physical aspect important now because kids now have time to work on it. And some just are not using this time to educate themselves on how to conduct it. So I'm seeing a lot of body weight circuits and burpees and all these like HIIT movements for like 8 to 12-year-olds, when we could be deeply learning about this topic. And there's so many amazing webinars and courses on this. And it's been interesting to see the polarizing actions going on now. But as far as the strength coaches who are doing a good job, it's great to see, because it is a good time to show them why we need to be focusing in on this and making the time for it, and not just when we're on lockdown. And I think kids now are able to get into that habit of physically training. And then when sports do come back, they're like, wait a minute, like I actually do need to keep up with this. And I always tell like the elementary and middle schoolers I'm still working with now remotely, I'm like, you guys are moving better than I've seen you move. Like, for one, they're still doing like their strength and conditioning, but two, they're playing in the front yard. Like, they're doing like 1v1s with their parents and with their siblings. And it's just like really bringing back the lost art of play. So that's also been really exciting. And I hope, I'm hopeful that youth sports will come back better, and there's going to have to be some restructuring going on, maybe less volume of games, less tournaments. So we'll see, but I'm definitely hopeful.
I think you're more optimistic than I am. Would you also add to that one of the reasons kids are moving more is because they're not as tired? And they actually can play, they can just be more freewheeling out there.
Well, there's a good response to that. I'm sorry, Tony, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead, Rick.
But what we did in the research for when we originally were going to do our paperwork, the peak level of activity for kids is at age 6, generally speaking, and then it continues to decline every year after that. So we're like, okay, what happens at age 6? Full day school. So, now the kids aren't in school all day long. Yeah, they have a lot more time to play, to get outside and do stuff. And so is it because the parents value the activity? Well, hopefully. But, we talked about earlier on that that's not always the case. But now they value, how do I keep my kid engaged? It's like, I don't want him or her on the video games all day. I don't really know enough to teach whatever they're doing in math. But hey, we can go outside. So I think it's become almost a necessity to say, this is something good we can all do together. So I think that's been fantastic for our field to see that happening. And I think at the same time, parents now get to recognize what a job we actually have. It's not as easy as it looks. And everybody thinks that, they're that great coach. Oh yeah, I could have them do that. And so you get out there and try to have them do it without that background, even though they might have been in every single game their child has ever played. It's still very different if you're the one teaching that. So I that's my point. Sorry, Tony.
Oh, no, I was going to say that, to go back to what you just said, Joel, we do not know how many kids are active. In fact, I would probably argue that fewer kids are active right now. Mm-hmm. What we see through our social media feeds are only 10, 20, 30-second clips. What happens the other 23-hour, 59 minutes and 30 seconds of the day. And then people throw these things out there with kids doing body weight circuits and, creating obstacle courses and all of these things. But I mean, we're just seeing what's exposed to us. And who are we? We're a very small fraction of what's really happening. We have no clue what the effects of this are. So again, in our own space, this goes much deeper than youth sport. It goes into giving kids the tools they need in some setting. whether it be a scholastic or school setting, or it be in a private setting. It doesn't matter where it is, but they need the tools so that we are not out here instructing. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, instructing or incorporating free play into your program. That's an oxymoron, isn't it? We're prescribing free play. It's ridiculous, but that's what we're saying, and that's what we're hearing. So to me, I just laugh sometimes when I hear some of these things and I see some of these things that are out there. What's happening the other 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 30 seconds that we don't see?
I think that's kind of the point. One of the many reasons why we are doing this movie, because I think that we are taking away the kids' choices, and the kids, now kids have to plan to play, or like you said, they have to plan to have time to play. We don't just say, let's go out and play with my friends. We say, let's go have a play date. It has to be like, you can only play between 2:52 and 3:15 or something ridiculous like that, rather than just go.
Yeah. I'm just going to tell a quick story and then I'll pass it on. But I remember as a kid, when I went out to play, I had to call. I had to pick up the phone and call. And I would dial that number. I can still tell you that number today. That's how many times I had to dial my friend Chucky. Can Chucky play? And, who does that today? That's how it was when I grew up.
Yeah, Tony, I agree. It's so funny. Speaking of play, I have this book. I don't know if you guys have read it.
Got it.
Amazing book, and I just was writing a blog on it and summarizing why we need play for shaping our brains and our ability to learn and adapt to new environments. And I started the blog off with how back when I was growing up, I used to wrestle with my brother and his friends, literally grapple, get pinned down, try and come up for air, try and pin him down. And from that experience, I definitely feel that helped me learn how to handle situations of duress. And that's the very nature of sports. Sports are stressful. Sports are spontaneous. You have to make decisions in a split second. So we need to find ways to elicit that without prescribing free play. We have to encourage it and build a culture of free play, because that's the very nature of sports, and we're forgetting that.
Yes, and one of the things that I think is also very important that you guys have talked a lot about is teaching, education. It's not about, like you said, it's not about telling people what to do. It's about explaining, showing it, look what we can do with this. One of the things I wanted to bring up to connect to that, and then I'll let you guys take it. The US doesn't really have, that I know of, a ministry of sport, if you will, like a lot of other countries do, where you kind of have a general idea what the country itself should focus on. We don't really have that. Almost every sport does their own thing. And so do you think that if we had something like that, would that make things a little bit better? Anybody who wants to jump in first?
Yeah, who wants to take that one? So it's a great question, and then the answer to that, and when I have my first day of teaching, the two words I always write on the corner of the board is "it depends." And so the purpose of our course is to understand on what it depends and what to do about it. So I think in this instance, Ministry of Sport could be very beneficial. It could allocate necessary funding for coaching education, for parental involvement, even for kids to learn more about the right things. We've talked a couple of times about what some of the parents are doing with their kids, and it's probably based on what they know at their gym or what they've seen on YouTube or on Facebook posts. Well, hey, they're doing this high intensity thing, that must be good, let's go do that, whether or not it's developmentally appropriate. So I think if it's used correctly, it could probably be a very good thing. Tony and Ergo will know too, we did an LTAD chat last week, I guess was the week before, with some of the guys from the USOPC's American Development Model. We posed that question to them too, and they basically came up with the same type of comments. It could be good, but it really depends on how it's enacted, enforced, and what really happens with it. So who's at the table? You know, the same is said of so many things. We talk about, you know, should coaches have a registry too? Well, it depends. What do they have to know? You know, if it's based on wins and losses, we've lost the day. But if it's based on performance and getting kids to come back and making great kids holistically, then we have a really good thing. So I think if they take all the work that we're doing and they implement that into what's going on, then yes, it's a great idea, but not necessarily.
Well, I'll just follow that up with, we have the Department of Health and Human Services and we have the CDC, right? And I'm not so sure they're talking to each other right now. So we don't know what it would be like at that level. But I think it's a good idea to have a department or an individual that does handle these matters, because, you know, sport is an important part of our culture. I think we can all agree upon that. It's an important part. And I think we see many of the abuses and you know, overuse injury syndromes and complications and things of that nature, because there is no regulation, right? We have no regulation. Anybody can be a coach in the United States. So we don't have any formal regulation. So that explains why we have some of the issues that we see today. So I think it's a good idea that Rick mentioned this. It's how do you mandate that, or how do you enforce mandates that are passed down? That's the difficult thing. And how are they subsidized? Who's going to pay for that? Those are all very, very difficult questions to answer sometimes. But I think in concept, it would be nice to have, at least at the state level, maybe not at the federal level, but at the state level, to have somebody do that. Because, you know, we have our high school state associations that they govern what occurs at, you know, among different high school programs at that level. And other than that, you just have your, you know, your regional associations that member clubs participate in, or communities at a local level compete. So it's fairly unregulated. So I think it would be helpful, but I'm not so sure it's an easy thing to be able to do.
Yeah, Tony, it's interesting you mentioned that anyone can become a coach, and it's so true. The barrier to entry is so low, and it just gives me flashbacks to taking the United Soccer Coaches C license course, which it's a national license, and it's a 2-week intensive course, practical and textbook, classroom sessions, and the physical piece was touched on for 10 minutes out of that in the entire length of the course. And we touched on periodization, which is good. So the importance of recovery and progressive overload and load monitoring, we touched on that for 10 minutes. And I was really surprised that a lot of coaches did not even know what periodization meant. So there has to be some sort of standard at the coaching education level for soccer. I know there's other team sports that don't touch on the physical piece, and I almost see it needs to be a requirement to at least understand things like periodization, growth and maturation, elements of long-term athletic development, how to program some of these things in your practice sessions when you think you don't have enough time to get your strength work in, and showing coaches how to execute. I think they just aren't educated, and they don't know where to begin. And that does need to start from the top and setting the standard for who we're hiring, what their education is, what's in the licenses, and what's required and written out in that job description. And the physical piece absolutely needs to be a requirement, and it's not.
You know, we keep talking about the coaching education piece, and it gets me back to thinking, I don't know if you've seen the latest statistics, but youth sports is a $26 billion industry, 19 billion in the United States. And yet almost every coach is volunteer coach. So I go, wait a minute. That means that the parents actually have the money to spend, but it's going to hotels, it's going to airlines, it's going to food, it's going to all these other things, not to the grassroots development. So, you know, it could easily just be reallocated and say, you know what, you need to stay close to home and up until this level. And then here's the money that's going to go back into coaching education, parent education, athlete education to make it happen. So I think it really is, as Tony mentioned too, like who's at the top, who is in charge of this group that would actually make these decisions, because it could go a really, really good way, which would be very exciting for the US, or it could just kind of muddle where it is now and go with the same old status quo and then really not get it very far. But we know that the resources are available depending on the outcome of the pandemic, because a lot of people are in trouble right now. You know, they're not working. Are they actually going to be able to re-enter the youth sports market if it does come back up? I saw a study like 50% of parents aren't really sure that it's safe for their kids to go back. So what are those numbers going to look like? So it's a really good time to get that out there. So I don't know if we need to form a coalition or a group that makes those mandates or recommendations and say, you know what, here we are, those at the grassroots and those who know people at the top down, and here's what we think should happen, and do a formal document and then put it out there and say, here's what should happen when we come back. And I think that's what's missing. Erica mentioned that before, that without actually showing people, like we could tell people, here's what we think, without actually showing them and putting it on paper, nothing's going to happen. So the ministry could make that happen, or we can make that happen for a ministry to occur.
Yeah, and that's kind of like something that I don't understand, because if you say to some coach, you know, you need to be like Pep Guardiola or Nick Saban, whatever, pick a coach, right? People will be like, oh, yeah, of course, absolutely. Yeah, genius. Of course, I have to listen to them, right? You know, they go like religious cult experience, right? But when you tell them that you have to do a little more physical activity for something that almost entirely requires physical activity, they say, no, we cannot waste money on that.
Well,
how does that make sense?
Yeah, I think they're thinking short term and not the long term costs. And like, there's been so many career ending ACL injuries, and like, yes, that's a financial cost, but the mental and emotional cost of that is devastating. And I always hear coaches saying, yeah, we got to like prevent ACL, we got to like do our best, but like they're doing a lot of talking, but they're not walking the walk. And I really wonder if like it's important to them, and if they really want to make ACL injury reduction a priority. So I always try to just ask them the question, what do you value for your athletes? Do you want them to go through something like that? No. Okay, then we need to take action to some degree, even if it's like Tony and Rick have said before, like 10-minute warm up, working on movement skills and balance, and incorporating some strength. So it doesn't need to be anything crazy. We can take small steps that can help with better reducing the chance of injury and that longer term cost.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, Erica, that's a great point. And I've been a coach educator for the Michigan High School Athletic Association for 20 years. And so I speak on athlete development and issues related to sport medicine and lower extremity issues, anterior cruciate ligament injuries. You know, one of the first questions I'll always ask, if I said, hey, if I took the first 10 or 15 minutes of your practice and gave you an ACL injury prevention protocol for your girls basketball or soccer team, how many would be willing to do that? And you probably get about 10 to 20% of the hands raised. If I were to flip the question around and say, hey, how many of you want to take the first 10 or 15 minutes of practice so I can work on the agility, the quickness, and the performance abilities of your athletes, I'll probably get about 90 to 100% participation. Yeah, I'll tell you right now, I can give you a dynamic warm-up, I can work on your agility, and I can give you an ACL intervention program in the first 10 to 15 minutes of your practice. So sometimes what we have to do, dare I say, we got to be sneaky. We have to dress the wolf as a sheep, and we have to sneak these things in there, and that's our way of exposing them to that information. But again, this is where that education piece is so important. We're just packaging one thing in another, and that's what we have to do as practitioners. But how many coaches know that? Because we don't have any, again, formal coaching education program in the United States.
No, and the education system, like Erica was saying, especially for soccer, is, I hate to say it, but it's catastrophic. I don't know when Erica took her C license, but I just took my B. I was going to take the C soon, but obviously who knows what's going to happen. And it was embarrassing. I think we were outside maybe total of 2 hours. And I'm talking over 3 months, you know, because you do the first week and then you wait like whatever it is, 2 months. and then you do another couple days. And we were outside, like I said, total with everybody presenting, maybe 2 hours. What can you possibly teach anybody or learn in 2 hours when it's like 20, 25 people, whatever it was, in the class? I think it was like 20, 18, 20, something like that. What can you learn? And then when you talk to the instructors, which I made him mad at me, which is great because I'm Italian and I like when I piss people off. It's part of my DNA. I asked him because he was talking about what the federation thinks kids should do. And I was just looking at it and I was like, I asked him because, like I said, I'm a smart ass. I just asked him, why do you think kids are stupid? And he looked at me like I had 3 heads. How dare I ask you a question, first of all. And second of all, he said, that's what kids can do. They cannot do anything else. When they're 9, they have to do this. When they're 11, they have to do this. When they're 12 or whatever, however, I forget how they broke it down. And I'm just looking at him and I'm just like, because I come from Italy, right? And we're, soccer based at the moment. All the things that he was talking about, I knew when I was 6 years old. And I just know, and I'm sure kids in Germany or in England or wherever, in Holland, they knew it too. I'm not saying that only Italians know that. But how is it that we're so focused on limiting our kids instead of set them free, so to speak? Let them soar.
Because we only know what we know. And then I think that it's true, but we've all talked about it, like what little education most of us get. There's a big survey too, and you're talking about adolescent growth and development and all these things. There are only at this point in time 9 universities in the U.S. that actually even have a course on pediatric growth and development. So everything that we learn is always adult based. It's adult driven. So we only know the adult model, and so that's what we're comfortable with. So we're almost kind of guessing based on our own experience growing up or what we might have seen with our kids. And so that's what we'll go out and teach, because we haven't really gotten the information yet, which goes back to why this coaching education piece is really, really huge as we move forward here. Because otherwise we're not doing right by kids, because they're not widgets, and we can't say, all right, at age 8, everybody can do this. But, education got set up that way for a number of years too, right? So, well, every kid in 3rd grade will be able to do this, and it completely flies in the face of development, growth and maturation, what kids should know and be able to do at any age, because there's so much variance. That's depending on how you look at a neurotypical kid, not even looking at atypical. So trying to figure out how you're going to put different populations together to be able to make them succeed. If we just kind of go with like this really small box, because it's our comfort zone. We don't want to go outside of that.
Yeah, I've had the great opportunity to visit. I've had the great opportunity to visit Europe several times, and Joel, it is just so. How should I say this? In Europe, it appears the learning, when I'm dealing with individuals in higher education, for lack of a better word, it's so organic. Education and learning is so organic in Europe. Everything in the United States is paint by numbers. And all you need to do is go to a bookstore, go to Barnes & Noble, How to Be a Millionaire, and you buy a book, How to Be a Millionaire. You buy a book, How to Be a Great Public Speaker. You buy a book, How to lose 60 pounds in 6 months. Everything here is paint by numbers. And so what do we expect? This is exactly what our teaching our coaches to do, paint by numbers. And this is why kids are not permitted to do certain things at a certain age. I can't remember where, but I had this discussion in the last 24 hours about squatting. There are fundamental skills, and then there are foundational skills. Well, to defecate at the age of 3 in Asia, you got to learn how to squat. So, here we have a toilet, which changes the entire dimensions of having to squat. If you can use a toilet, you can squat. I don't understand why I have to wait till you're 7 or 8 years of age to squat. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
I cannot follow that up, but but I think that's exactly when I see what, like, for example, I was talking to one of the coaches for a big club in Italy, what was it, U10, U9. I forget now. And I was talking to him about in soccer. And I was talking to him, and he was asking me because, like, oh, America, what you guys are doing, right? Because he didn't know what we do here. And after I finished telling him how we work here, he had a heart attack, I think, because he told me, I mean, he coaches, like I said, 7, 8, 9 years old, something like that. And I was talking to 2 coaches, actually. One was coaching the older ones, like 2007s and thereabouts. And he was telling me that over there, besides the fact that everybody has physical training, blah, 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 all of those things that we're talking about, and kids are sent to school because they work in an actual academy setting, not like here. They only play, for example, once a week. And this is professional academies, where eventually if you make it, you make the first team, you are playing professional. Not like here that once you're 18, 19, hope for the best. You may go to college and then maybe you do something, unless you're Pulisic or something. He could not believe that so many kids here in the U.S. play upwards of 2 or 3 games, not just a week, but sometimes on the weekend.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, here's a professional coach at a professional team that he just cannot comprehend. He's like, what are you guys doing to those kids? You're killing them. But yet we here in the U.S., we think we know better than the professionals. I don't understand.
Yeah.
Maybe I just need to go back to Europe or something. I don't know. I just cannot comprehend that mentality of why are we hurting our kids?
We look at the coaching models too, right? Because in Europe, a lot of their higher level coaches coach at the youth level, at the developmental level. Here, we're just the opposite of that. We got our volunteer, if you don't coach, your daughter doesn't play this season. Oh, really? Well, I guess I'll do it then. So it's a completely different model that we've set up too, that leads into all that stuff too. And I ran the middle grades, we called it in school district of Philadelphia. So all schools that had 5th, 6th, 7th, and or 8th grade, I ran the athletics program for all those schools. It was about 250 schools, I guess. But what would happen was somebody would sign up to be the coach because they knew they could get out of school 2 days a week to go play a game. I'm like, no. That's not how this is going to work. You're going to actually have to show the developmental, what you've done. They had to do all the grades for the students to make sure they're starting to instill in them at that point in time the importance of actually going to class, and actually show that they had practice. So we cut back. They couldn't have any games the first month of the season, and they were like really mortified at first. They enjoyed it later. They understood it, but it's just easy. Like, hey, I don't really have to do anything. We'll just, you go out there. I know who my best players are. You, and you go out there and play. I'll stand here and look like a stud because I found the 5 best players who are developmentally ahead of the curve. So yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, one of the things that he said when I was talking to him that just blew my mind, and I just haven't been able to get it out of my head, was that for them, what's important is they're investing on those kids for 10 years. They're making a commitment to these kids from age, whatever, 10 years old, until they do reach or don't reach the first team. We ask parents to invest in the club, not the other way around. They invest on the kids. Now, of course, is a perfect system in Europe? Obviously not. Do they have problems? Of course they do. Do they shady business deal? Of course. But I love how and this is, like I said, one of the top teams in the world who's thinking about, I have to invest in these kids because eventually that kid potentially will make the first team. We don't. We do not look at it that way. We just want numbers to come into our clubs, and we could care less what happens to that kid long term. We only care about today, that I'm getting the check. Now that kid get hurt, I get somebody else. I mean, I can, my daughter got hurt last season, nothing serious. She just fell down, hurt her shoulder a little bit. She had to be out for a few days. Her coach told her, not what happened, not how are you doing, none of that. He just said, oh, that means that you're not playing this weekend.
Yeah.
And she was so hurt. I mean, she was crushed just by hearing that one sentence, and she was crushed. Not even a "how are you."
Yeah, that's Joel. Unfortunately, much of the youth sports system is a for-profit system. It's not a 503c nonprofit. So I run a 503c nonprofit youth lacrosse league, and the mindset's a little bit different. So, you know, for us, it's about getting kids involved and having the opportunity and participate in a sport that's new to them. And hopefully they find some passion and some engagement and something they can play on into high school, or maybe as a young adult, or even intramurals in college, or whatever. But, you know, I have seen in the past probably 15 years, you know, the growth and proliferation of youth sport. And you see this in the expansion of teams now. You'll have a club, and they have their premier select level, and then they have the green team and the red team and the black team and the silver team, and tier after tier after tier, you know, and they shuffle kids into these various tiers. There's really a loss of personal connection and touch because the size of the club has grown. And so there's not this intimate bond anymore. Coaches are shuffled around in many cases, so they lose some of that bond. But yeah, it's a driving force to produce revenue, so the club can keep its head above water. And we now have this bill that was introduced, and Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the Play Coalition of Sports, or something to that effect, where it's a bill. There are a number of organizations, and I think it's up to 3,000 now, 3,000 youth sport organizations that are advocating to receive some type of relief to their sport club or to their sport organization, because of course they have to pay facility fees and coaching fees and who knows what else, equipment, so on and so forth. But it is proliferated into a business, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm as capitalist as anybody else. There's nothing wrong with that. But where it becomes wrong, and it is where we start to see the abuses and the problems and the issues that we see among youth, like you just explained. You know, the lack of personal care or attention, or is just disintegrated, and that needs to change.
Yeah, because that's another thing that I don't necessarily mind clubs making money. I mean, people have to make a living, you know, coaches need to eat as well, of course. But like, how hard is it for all these big clubs to even hire one of you guys? You know, just one. And then you guys can run the whatever LTA deal, however you want to call it, for that particular club. Even just one person per club would make a ginormous difference as a whole. And you can still make money, because one more coach is not going to change anything for that rich club anyway. That's the stuff I don't get, because they're willing to hire any Joe Schmo that comes in to coach and pay them $500. Why can't you give $500 to an actual physical trainer, or whatever the proper term is, to run their kids? You know, you can just have one person that just tells everybody, hey, this is what we do. You have a director of coaching, right? Why can't you have a director of training, so to speak?
That's a good question. And I think it really comes down to what the directors of coaching value. And a lot will say they value player development, and you see that on many youth clubs' position statement. But when you look at what development is, it's the technical, tactical, mental, physical. And I found that the mental and physical are the missing pieces. And I think a lot of clubs are under the impression that it's expensive to bring a consultant in or to hire someone from out of house. But it's money well spent, and they could cut back on some of like the extra skills that they're doing, or the extra camps where they're just repeating the same things over and over again, and they need to realize the other buckets need to be filled. And just looking to the clubs in Europe, I know like Ajax, Liverpool youth, they do an amazing job. And while these kids might be considered early specializers because they're playing year round, they're also doing a comprehensive LTAD model. Kids at Liverpool are playing judo and handball in the off season. They're doing gymnastics sessions, and you don't really need that much extra money and resources to conduct that stuff. A lot of coaches and directors of coaching here in the States are like, well, they have all these extra resources to add the physical piece. And it's like, well, you don't need that much. You can incorporate handball or dodgeball into your small-sided warm-up at practice. So again, it always just comes back to coaches willing to learn, directors of coaching holding the coaches accountable and having some sort of standard. Hey, are you touching on these physical qualities throughout the year? Are you incorporating other sports to some degree? And just setting a requirement. And there's not a lot of that happening at the top. And because I think they think it costs so much extra money, and it doesn't have to.
And it probably wouldn't cost them that much money long term anyway. That's the stuff. And like I said, I keep banging my head. I don't know if other states are better than Nevada. I know Las Vegas is a disaster for physical training, because I can't even think of one coach I spoke to that cares. Not one that really would say, yes, you're right. Because like I see it, like my son's team, they played so much because they played over the summer, they played over the fall, they were playing in January, February, and I could tell they were fried, kaput. They had nothing left. And I kept telling everybody, I said, guys, the kids are tired. We need to do something. This is not good. This is like disaster waiting to happen. And I have no doubt in my mind, had we continued to play, somebody would have gotten hurt. Because when you're tired, you can't function. I mean, I don't have to tell you that, but so how do we educate these coaches? If they're not going to take courses, they're not going to go do it on their own. So how can we show it to them practically, I guess? Is there a way that we can reach them besides what we're already doing?
You were talking earlier, we were thinking about the Ministry of Sport, and if we had an organization like that, that would have that go down to all developmental level coaches. But we talked about this earlier too, with the American Development Model from the USOPC. Most coaches don't even know they have a national governing organization for their sport. So even if that organization has put out, here's what you should be doing, and here's our model and what that should look like, coaches don't even know that it's available. So we need to be able to make that connection between what's already out there and then how to implement it. Because like you said, it doesn't cost a lot of money, and a lot of the resources now are free, especially now. Like everybody just wants to share their information. Like, here, I'm giving it to you, just please do it. So I think if we had more of I guess what we're really looking for is a structured way of getting a lot of this done. So is there a structured way for the NGBs to say, here's our material? Because a lot of times they'll do their fancy brochures, and then it'll sit on the front counter when you go to your sports practice and say, oh, look, there's a fancy brochure, but nobody reads it or says, well, I really need to follow up and find out more about that. So maybe that's our role, is we need to be the ones standing there handing out the fancy brochure and telling them how to implement that in their program, so that they see that there's a top-down and a bottom-up approach to make this happen. Because they're not really seeing the legitimacy of it. They're not seeing the importance of it, because they're still being measured on wins and losses. They're not being measured at the end of the season. Wade Gilbert out in California has these really cool metrics that he uses for coaches to say, all right, how many kids signed up again for next year? Well, they're not measured by that. They're just measured by how well they performed out there. It's that product-based mentality that we have in the U.S. There's always that thing with, if you see a group of youngsters in a mall after a contest with a uniform on, what's the first thing you ask them? Hey, did you enjoy yourself? How's everything going? You really loving playing soccer? No. Did you win? And then if they say no, then you have nothing to say. You're like, oh, sorry. So, we need to really change that mentality to find out what the measurements are, and then how do we get the tools for coaches to be measured properly across what they're doing.
Well, I think it's also to include more of what Erica was saying about the mental part, because I think that considering how much kids have to do these days, and I see it with my own kids. I mean, by the time they get home, if we have a practice that week, it's like 9, 10 o'clock at night. You drive half hour, and if you're in California, you probably drive even more than that because of sheer distances. Too many kids, the mental aspect is being ignored. And then you have kids where you have coaches who say, toughen up, be tough, or don't cry, or don't do this, or don't do that. How is that training? Because we have to train, I believe, and I'm not a doctor, we have to train the whole person from head to toes, not just chest down, so to speak.
Yeah, I think Rick said it earlier. We can't treat our kids like adults. We're imposing adult models. This is what our coaches know. So this is the apple doesn't roll too far from the tree, and here we are with our army of volunteer coaches that are imposing adult models on kids. And kids, for the most part, should live a carefree existence, but here we are imposing all the stress of the adult world and the adult dynamic on kids in even a sport environment, which should be the most fun, enjoyable part of your day, right? That's what it was for me. And here we are making it more stressful. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of where we have to start. And again, Rick brought up the American development model. We don't have a centralized sport bureau or sport ministry or anything to that effect, but at least can we all agree upon a framework that can be implemented in schools, in community recreation, in youth sport, and the American development model offers that opportunity. The USOPC, their hands are tied in some cases, both financially and in terms of regulating or mandating all the various national governing bodies. But I think a fair number of those NGBs are following the USOPC guidelines as it relates to the ADM. But, we all have to get on the same page. That's the top-down approach. The bottom-up are individuals like Erica and what she's doing. I would argue that a club, if they were to hire somebody like Erica, would increase their participation numbers, which would increase your revenue. That's what they have to understand, is that she provides a bottom-up product that enables athlete development holistically. And it follows those principles of the ADM. So it has to be a top-down. We all have to agree that there's a particular framework that can work. And then from the bottom up, we need those foot soldiers that will actually go out there and implement it. And that's what has to be done.
Yeah, I think you just said something very important. The clubs don't understand the value. Because if we are to make money, and it is all about money, let's tell it like it is, because it is all about money. Wouldn't you want to be able to offer something more than somebody else?
Absolutely.
So that you can make more money? I mean, isn't that the logic next step?
It's the American way.
Yeah, okay. But if it is the American way, let's use the American way, and let's then give as much as possible so we can make more money, if you want to go that cynically.
Yeah, Joel, we've had this conversation before. If that's the system that we're doing right now, we have to find a way to provide that value to the parents and the kids and all the families who are investing in these clubs. And I mean, as far as the club dues go, if they're on the higher end, then I sure hope that kid has a great coach who focuses on player development, who develops not only athletes, but also humans, who really teaches them the game, and who is involved in their lives beyond just them as a player. And I would be much more okay with the cost if there was quality coaching provided within the club, and then also just bringing other people in as far as outside experts.
For sure. I have a couple more questions, if you don't mind. One of the things you guys brought up earlier was the late bloomers. Two of the coolest stories I've heard about those. I mean, we all know so many superstar players who were late bloomers. I heard recently an interview with on the NHL network on the radio, Nick Lidstrom, the great defenseman for the Red Wings, and he talked about how he was horrible, according to him, until he was like 18, 19. He couldn't skate. Now, to hear that from him is ridiculous, considering how good he was. But he said that he was nowhere near ready for the NHL at 18, 19, even though he was. And he was really good. You hear about Antoine Griezmann, the superstar French player that just won the World Cup a couple of years ago when he was 15 years old. No one wanted him. No one. The father had to take him to Spain for the kid to even get on a team, And 6 years later, he wins the World Cup, or 7 years later, he wins the World Cup. What are we doing in the U.S. to help those things, where we do not lose kids along the way? Because too many times, if you're not 6'3" or whatever, you're not 200 pounds or whatever it is for the particular sport, they just throw you away. Boys and girls, not just boys.
We're not doing what we need to be doing because we're still focused on winning. So we're not playing that developmental game to let those kids who are the late bloomers have every opportunity to continue to grow and learn, because it's so much easier as a coach to take our early maturing kids who will be playing a little bit better at that particular time to be our starters, because our objective is winning. And parents aren't going to keep signing up for a team if the team loses, even though all the data indicates that the kid would much rather play for a team that goes 0-12 but gets a chance to play than to play on a team that goes 12-0 and never even get into a game. So we're still kind of really missing the point about what we need to do to be able to help every kid developmentally. And again, I think we have this chasm between our national bodies and our boots on the ground and what that should look like, to be able to bring those together to make that sandwich and say, all right, here's what's the middle of the sandwich to hold the two pieces of bread together. Here's what we need to do developmentally to help these kids be the best they can in a holistic approach. And I think a lot of what we're missing is, what should that really look like? I think the product that we all need to be working together on is what is that manual? What do we give to a coach? What do we give to a parent to say, here's what it does, here's the evidence, and here's how to put that into play? We talk about it, we do webinars, podcasts, all these different things, but what is it that I can actually do? And it's not easy, because developmentally, we know that the kids that we're working with are all over the place on that curve. So it has to be able to meet that kid where he or she is, but still appeal to the whole team. Like, how do we put that together? And it's not an easy task, but it certainly is doable. And I think until we bridge that gap between what we see up here and what parents' expectations are, it's going to continue to be the way it is, because our outcome measures are incorrect.
Well, and one more question, if you guys don't mind. One of the things that you guys have taught me over the last few months since I've connected with all of you has been how important it is that we develop boys and girls the way they're supposed to be. Too many coaches don't understand the fact that boys and girls are not the same thing. How do we make sure that, and again, I know that it's all education and all of that, but there has to be something that we can make coaches understand, because I'm sure that most coaches are not trying to ruin girls' lives and boys' lives. But how can we bridge that gap to cut down on these injuries, besides the obvious, stop playing that much?
Well, I'll start and I'll let the others jump in. But again, there is so much variability with growth, physical growth, and emotional growth and maturation, that, you know, it's very difficult to, you know, really pinpoint that, you know, at this age boys should do this and at this age girls should do this. You know, when we look at things chronologically, we need to look at things biologically. And there's no reason why male, female athletes can't be doing those exact same things up into what we call these various markers of growth, peak height velocity and peak strength velocity, peak weight velocity, all these terms that are often used in the scientific context, and I don't want to go there, but those are just very fundamental elemental things that, you know, we can preach to coaches. There are various stages where they can be aware of certain changes to the body that alter certain movement characteristics of the body, and integrate things in their practices and in their physical development that will help make athletes more resilient. Sometimes it's difficult to say we prevent injuries. I don't know if we ever prevent injuries, but I think we can make kids more resilient. Particularly female athletes, when we talk about lower extremity injury. I think there's a lot of things that we can do. The science is there, Joel. The science has been there for a long time. You know, I read articles back between 1995 and 2000 about anterior cruciate ligament injury and prevention. They're the same stuff as they are today. Exact same stuff.
Yeah, that's the last century. It doesn't count.
Yeah, it's the exact same stuff. It's been there. It hasn't changed. What we've done a lousy job of doing is implementing it. And that's where we've been really lousy, and that's the coaching education piece. That's kind of where we've been kind of lacking.
Dancing around, yep.
Sonia, I like that you said we need to keep it simple, and I think like for us, like we love the science end and researching what's going on at peak height velocity, peak weight velocity for girls, and just educating coaches what's going on during those periods in simple terms. Well, hey, their coordination might be disrupted, or they might have a decline in speed. So here are some things you can start to sprinkle in at your training sessions, whether that's maximal speed work with a long recovery and educating on how to train the energy systems properly with work to rest, how to do on-field strength and activation movements within warm-up, and just providing them with a very simple framework and saying, hey, we're not going to fully prevent injury here, but we're going to develop them as better athletes, and we can do what we can control during this time. So the physiology we can't really control, but the things we can control are developing coordination, honing in on that, developing speed, working on strength and movement patterns, and approaching it from an optimistic standpoint and telling them, hey, there's so many things during the growth spurt that we can absolutely control. And that's what we program in our practices.
You know, bringing it back to where we all started with what is long-term athletic development, the original Canadian model, in the Canadian model, Ballier was advocating for tracking and measuring all of these time events for kids, but we don't do that. So we have no idea. And Erica mentioned the success of some of the European academies. They do. And they adjust their training appropriately all the way through growth and development for each and every player that they come in contact with. We just ignore all that. We ignore the science because we're just worried about something completely different. So I think until, again, like we've been saying, until we bring that coaching education piece in and show how easy this is, it's not hard. They're actually equations that you just plug numbers in and it tells you where you are. It's easy to do. So I think until we can actually connect those two pieces again to say, here's how easy this is, it doesn't take a lot of time, and it adds value. You know, we talk about our American economic system and, you know, profit centered. What's the value add? If everybody's doing the same exact thing, it really becomes a question of who attracts the best kids. The early developers that are going to take their program somewhere, rather than who's actually developing these kids to the best of their ability, who's tracking these clubs to see what happens to these kids after they stop playing or after they finish a certain level. So until we put a lot of those measures in place, it's really going to be difficult.
Well, I think we can probably end it there because I know I can go on for a while. Thank you. Really, really, really thank you for taking the time to do this. I appreciate it. I can't wait to be able to come and see you guys in person in the near future, we hope. It means that we have at least contained this crazy time. I'm definitely looking forward to it. Maybe we can have like one of these get-togethers all at the same time in some place. Maybe
Sure.
in Hawaii. Maybe a Hawaii by the beach or something with some drinks.
I'll take Italy.
Oh,
There you
Italy!
go.
Hey, I'm good with that too. I'm
I'll
totally
take
good
Italy.
with that.
Yeah, I'll
We can
go.
all be having some good pizza, some
Yeah,
good
nice.
food, and totally.
Joel, I just want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to share things that I think all three of us are really, really passionate about, and we really want to make a difference in the youth sport arena, so to speak, and physical activity, not just youth sport, but opportunities like this are golden. So I just want to reach out and say thank you for giving us this opportunity to share with you and your audience. So thanks again.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. It's been fun, and again, I think like you said, it's all about all of us trying to get better and educate not just ourselves, because we can just like anything, right? We don't expect somebody else to tell us what to do. We need to also go after it a little bit. I mean, we do that for every other business. I don't understand why we cannot do it for youth sports and our kids and make their lives better. Because it's not about the fact that I won a game, whatever that means. It's about the rest. So thank you for your time. Let's do it again soon, I hope. And we'll talk soon. And Erica, please feel better.
Thank you. Fingers crossed.
Thank you so much for being such a good sport.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Erica.
Yep,
Yeah,
good to
nice
see
to
everybody.
meet you.
Thanks again, Joel. This is great.
Thanks.
Bye.